Wesley Shaw's hands were raw from the cold, his breath fogging up the windshield of his beat-up pickup as he turned onto the long, snowy driveway that led to the biggest house he'd ever seen in person. "Place looks like a damn castle," he muttered, shifting the truck into park. Snowflakes clung to his flannel as he stepped out, boots crunching against the frost-covered gravel. The bed of the truck held neatly stacked firewood, his last delivery for the day. He glanced down at the invoice. "C. Prescott. 1 quart. Paid in full." He adjusted his jacket and knocked on the heavy wooden door, expecting an older woman or maybe a live-in caretaker. It wasn't unusual for folks up here in the mountains to have help. He didn't expect the door to swing open to reveal a woman in a wool sweater, leggings, and thick socks, her dark hair swept into a messy bun, and bright hazel eyes staring at him like he'd just dropped from the sky. "You must be the Firewood guy," she said, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. "Yeah, Wesley Shaw. I've got your order in the truck." He gestured toward it. "Mind showing me where you want it stacked?" She nodded, stepping aside to let him in. "Out back, near the patio. I'll show you." The inside of the house was warm and modern, but not flashy. It had high ceilings, big windows, and a lived-in feel that surprised him. For a house this size, it felt cozy. He followed her through the kitchen, noting the faint smell of cinnamon and something baking. "Nice place," he said. She glanced over her shoulder. "Thanks. It was my grandfather's. I just moved in 2 weeks ago." "From the city?" "New York." He raised an eyebrow. "Bit of a change." "That's the point." They stepped outside, and he got to work unloading the wood while she watched from the edge of the patio, her arms still crossed against the chill. "I could help," she offered. He laughed once. "Not unless you want a splinter and a sore back." She smiled, and something about it made the cold feel less sharp. "I'm Cassia Prescott." "Wesley," he said again, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You live here alone?" "For now. My dog's around here somewhere, probably chasing squirrels." Wesley nodded. "You planning to stay through the winter?" "That's the plan. I needed a break from everything." He didn't press. Everyone had their reasons for escaping. He had his too. After finishing the stack, he dusted off his hands. "All set." "That was fast," she said, surprised. "Do I owe you anything?" "Nope. Paid already." She tilted her head. "Still, can I offer you some coffee? Or pie?" "I bake too much." His stomach growled before he could say no. He hadn't had anything since the egg sandwich he split with his daughter that morning. "Pie sounds good." Back inside, he sat at the counter while she plated 2 slices of warm apple pie and poured coffee into mismatched mugs. "You've got a kid, right?" she asked casually. He blinked. "Yeah. How'd you know?" She pointed to the car seat in the back of his truck through the window. "How old?" 5. "Her name's Grace." His voice softened. "She's everything." Cassia handed him the pie. "Where's her mom?" He hesitated. "She left when Grace was 2. "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "We're doing okay. Some days are harder than others, but she's a good kid. Smart. Way too smart." Cassia smiled. "Sounds like she's lucky to have you." He looked away, pretending to focus on the pie. "I'm the lucky one." They ate in silence for a moment before she said, "You live nearby?" "Few miles down the mountain. Tiny cabin. Not as fancy as this, but it works." She looked down at her mug. "I didn't mean to make you feel you didn't. Just different worlds, you know?" Cassia didn't reply, but her eyes stayed on him a second too long. He stood, finishing the last bite. "Thanks for the pie. It was real good. You sure Grace wouldn't want a piece?" "I could wrap one up for her." He hesitated. "I mean, yeah, that'd be nice." She smiled and moved to the kitchen, wrapping a slice in foil before handing it to him. Their fingers brushed, and something passed between them, brief but warm. "Thanks again," he said. "Come by anytime," she replied. "Seriously, I'll probably need more firewood soon anyway." He gave a small nod and walked out into the cold, heart beating a little faster than it should have. The next week, she called again. Then again the week after. Each time, she had a reason: more wood, a question about how to start the fire, even once just to ask if he knew anyone who could fix a leaky pipe. He offered to do it himself, and she accepted. Cassia started leaving out a plate of cookies or a thermos of hot cider whenever he came by. She'd chat with him while he worked about books, food, childhood stories. He found himself staying longer each time, not just because of the warmth inside her home, but because of her. Grace came with him one snowy afternoon, bundled in a purple coat and snow boots. her cheeks rosy from the cold. "This is my friend Cassia," Wesley said as they stepped inside. "She's the lady I bring firewood to." Cassia knelt down, her smile soft. "Hi, Grace. I've got some hot cocoa with marshmallows. You want some?" Grace eyed her cautiously, then nodded. They sat at the counter, the three of them, sipping cocoa and eating cookies while snow fell outside the big windows. It felt like something out of a storybook. And for the first time in a long time, Wesley felt like maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought. Later that night, after he tucked Grace into bed, he sat on the worn-out couch in his cabin, staring at the flickering fire. He should have been worried about bills, or how he was going to fix the hole in the roof come spring. But all he could think about was Cassia, her laugh, the way she always had flour on her hands, how Grace had smiled at her like she'd known her forever. He didn't know much about her life before the mountains, but that didn't matter. She was here now, and somehow, she was becoming a part of his world. Wesley didn't expect to see Cassia again until the next firewood delivery, but 3 days later, her SUV pulled up outside his cabin just as the sun was beginning to dip behind the trees. He was out front, patching the edge of the porch with salvage lumber, hammer clenched between his calloused fingers. Grace was on the swing set he'd built from old fence posts, her laughter echoing through the trees. Cassia stepped out, wearing a thick scarf and a navy wool coat that didn't match the mud streaks on her boots. She looked out of place and completely at ease at the same time. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, her voice tentative. Wesley straightened, brushing sawdust from his jeans. "You're not. Just fixing what winter's been chewing on." "I brought something," she said, lifting a paper bag from the passenger seat. Thank you. For the pipe. I know you didn't have to do that." She handed him the bag, and he peered inside 2 loaves of crusty bread, a container of stew still warm, and something wrapped in wax paper that smelled like butter and sugar. "Cassia, you didn't have to, I know. That's why I did." Grace ran over, cheeks flushed. "Is that the cookie lady?" Cassia knelt down. "You remembered me." Grace nodded solemnly. "You make the best cookies." Cassia leaned in like she was sharing a secret. "I brought something better this time. Cinnamon rolls." Grace's eyes widened. "With the icing?" "Of course." Wesley watched as Cassia followed his daughter into the cabin like she belonged there, her laughter mixing with Grace's as they unpacked the food and set it out on the small wooden table. He didn't know what to make of it. People didn't do this. Not for him. Not for Grace. Not without expecting something in return. Inside, the aroma of the stew filled the space, making it feel warmer than the fire ever could. Cassia moved like she'd been there before, unwrapping the bread and pulling bowls from the open shelf without asking. "You're dangerous," Wesley said, sitting across from her once Grace was settled with her cinnamon roll. "Showing up with food like this, making yourself at home." She met his gaze. "You think I'm trying to win you over?" "I think you've already won, Grace." Cassia looked at the little girl, who was happily licking icing from her fingers. "She's easy to love." Wesley's jaw tensed. "Yeah, which is why I'm careful." Cassia's expression shifted, the playfulness softening into something more serious. "I'm not here to mess with either of you, Wesley." "Then why are you here?" She hesitated, then looked around the cabin at the cracked window pane, the patched floorboards, the family photos taped to the fridge instead of framed. "Because I like it here," she said quietly. "Because I like how it feels." He leaned back, folding his arms. "You grew up in a house like this?" "No," she said, eyes flicking to the window. "I grew up in boardrooms and black cars, with people who smiled for cameras and called that love. This," she gestured around them, "this is real." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. After dinner, Cassia helped Grace find her mittens and boots before stepping onto the porch. The sky had gone dark, stars glittering between the bare branches. She lingered at the bottom of the steps. "I could take her for a few hours this weekend," she said suddenly. "Just to the town's winter festival. I saw the flyers. There's a carousel and a puppet show." Wesley froze. "She's not usually with anyone I don't know real well." Cassia nodded. "Then come too." He studied her in the moonlight. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I miss the sound of laughter in my life. And because I like you, Wesley. Both of you." His throat tightened, but he nodded. "All right." She smiled, and the headlights of her car caught the edge of it as she drove away. The winter festival that Saturday was a blur of color and sound. Cassia arrived in a charcoal coat and knit hat, her gloved hands holding 3 steaming cups of cider. Grace started between booths, tugging Cassia's hand at every turn, and Wesley followed, barely believing the way his daughter clung to Cassia like they'd known each other for years. They watched a puppet show, shared kettle corn, and took turns pulling Grace on a wooden sled across the snow-packed park lawn. At one point, Cassia and Wesley stood side by side, watching Grace make snow angels beneath a string of twinkling lights. "I haven't laughed this much in years," Cassia murmured. "You should do it more often," Wesley replied. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "People think money fixes everything, but it just hides the cracks in a prettier frame." He glanced at her. "Is that what you ran from?" She didn't answer, but he saw it in her eyes. Later that evening, back at the cabin, while Grace napped on the couch beneath a faded quilt, Cassia stood near the fire, her arms wrapped around herself. "I'm not who you think I am," she said. Wesley looked up from where he was stoking the embers. "I haven't asked you to be anyone." "I know. That's what makes it harder." He stood, brushing off his hands. "You're hiding something." "I'm not hiding. I'm just not ready to be seen." He stepped closer, but not too close. "I've got enough ghosts of my own. I'm not about to chase yours." Cassia looked at him, her breath shallow. "What if I told you I wasn't just some city girl who inherited a mountain house?" "I'd say I already figured that out." Her laugh was soft, almost bitter. "Of course you did. But I'd also say," he continued, "that you're the first person who's walked into this house and made it feel bigger. Not because of what you own, because of who you are." She blinked, and he saw the wall crack just a little. "I should go," she whispered. He nodded, but didn't move. She leaned down, kissed Grace's forehead, then brushed past him and out into the night. The next week passed in a strange rhythm. Wesley kept busy with deliveries and repairs, but his thoughts drifted too often to Cassia. She didn't call, didn't show up, not even a note. Grace noticed too. "Did she go back to New York?" she asked one morning, her voice quiet as she tied her shoes. "I don't know," Wesley said. And he didn't, until he drove past the old lodge on the edge of town and saw her car parked outside. The place had been closed for years, its windows boarded up and shingles missing from the roof. Yet there she was, standing outside with a man in a long coat and a clipboard. Wesley slowed, heart pounding. He didn't stop. But that night, when the knock came on his door, he wasn't surprised to find her there. "I bought the lodge," she said without preamble. "I'm going to restore it." He stared at her. "Why?" "Because I want to make something that matters. And because this town gave me something real. I want to give something back." He stepped aside, letting her in. She moved past him, into the cabin, her eyes settling on Grace's drawings taped to the wall. "I'm not good at this," she said. "Letting people in." "You didn't have to," he said. "You just did." She turned to him, her expression vulnerable in a way he hadn't seen before. "I'm not just Cassia Prescott. I'm Cassia Lorne. My family owns Lorne Holdings. Hotels. Real estate. A lot of things I stopped caring about a long time ago." He let that settle. "Are you still running from it?" he asked. "No," she said. "I'm trying to build something different." He crossed the room, heart thudding. "You already have." And then, as the fire crackled in the hearth and the snow piled silently outside, they stood in the quiet understanding of two broken things trying to be whole. The old lodge's transformation began with the sound of chainsaws and the scent of sawdust drifting down the mountain. By the end of the second week, Cassia had contractors on site, permits posted in the frosted windows, and a team clearing out the rotted interiors. Word spread fast in the small town someone was finally reviving the long-abandoned resort perched above the valley. No one knew why the newcomer cared so much, but curiosity turned to excitement when she hired locals and paid them more than fair wages. Wesley watched it all unfold from a cautious distance. He hadn't seen her since that night by the fire. She hadn't returned to the cabin, and he hadn't stopped by the estate. But she'd left behind something more powerful than a promise she'd left behind intent. And he couldn't ignore it. On a Wednesday afternoon, just after dropping Grace off at her friend's house for a play date, Wesley found himself driving up the winding road toward the lodge. He parked beside a brand-new black SUV, out of place among the rusted pickups and cement mixers. Cassia stood on the front steps, clipboard under one arm, her hair tucked into a cap as she gestured to a group of workers hauling out broken furniture. "You're not wasting any time," Wesley said as he approached. She turned, surprised but not startled. "You came. Figured I should see what kind of madness you're pulling off up here." Cassia stepped down, wiping her hands on her jeans. She wore a tool belt, and there were paint flecks on her sleeves. They told me it would take a year. I said 6 months. He glanced around. You planning to open by summer? That's the goal. Boutique-style rooms, a restaurant with local food, private trails for guests. I want it to be somewhere people come to feel peace, not just luxury. He studied her. Doesn't sound like the kind of place your family would put their name on. They're not putting their name on it. I am. Wesley nodded slowly. And that name still means something? Cassia shrugged. Not to me. What matters is what I build with it now. She led him through the interior, where the walls had been stripped to the studs and the scent of fresh pine lingered over the dust. He trailed her as she talked about the kitchen layout, the fireplaces she planned to restore, the rooftop terrace she wanted to add for stargazing. You ever done anything like this before? He asked. I've overseen renovations. Nothing this personal. She paused, her eyes scanning the exposed beams above them. This one's mine. Every nail, every window, every mistake. Wesley leaned against a half-demoed doorway. You're not afraid of failing? I'm terrified, she said. But I'm more afraid of going back to a life that never belonged to me in the first place. He watched her for a long moment. Who's helping with all this? You've got a team, but someone's funding it. I pulled my trust early. Had to fight for it. But it's mine now. Every dollar. He raised an eyebrow. You walking away from billions? I'm walking towards something better. She kept walking, stepping over stray boards and trailing her fingers along the raw wood. Wesley followed in silence, the sound of his boots echoing in the empty halls. When they reached the back deck, she paused at the edge. The valley stretched below, snow-dusted trees and winding roads fading into the horizon. I used to think power meant control, Cassia said without looking at him. Now I think it means choosing what kind of world you live in. Wesley stepped beside her. And you chose this. I chose you, she said quietly. I just didn't know what that would cost me. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw the weight she carried not from money or expectation, but from hope. It settled in her shoulders, in the crease between her eyes, in the way she stood like she was waiting for something to go wrong. You don't have to prove anything to me, he said. I know, but I need to prove it to myself. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Grace made this. Said you should have it. Cassia unfolded it. Crayon hearts surrounded a stick figure of a woman with big eyes and a crooked smile, standing beside a smaller girl holding her hand. At the bottom, in careful block letters, were the words, Miss Cassia is my friend. Cassia's hands trembled slightly. She made me a friend before I even knew I needed one. Wesley hesitated, then spoke. You want this to work? The lodge? The town? Us? You can't just build from the outside. You've got to let people in. I let you in, didn't I? You let me see pieces, he said. But the rest? You keep locked up like you're afraid of someone running off with it. Cassia folded the drawing, carefully, and slipped it into her pocket. I don't know how to do this without losing myself. Then don't lose yourself, Wesley said. Just stop pretending you're still alone. She looked at him, and for once, didn't look away. That weekend, Cassia asked Wesley to help source reclaimed wood from a nearby town for the lodge's flooring. They drove together in his truck, snow swirling softly around them as the road stretched out. For miles, they talked about childhoods, regrets, the sound of silence in empty houses. I used to dream about disappearing, Cassia admitted, just vanishing into a place where no one knew my name. And now, he asked, now I dream about being seen, but not because of what I have. Later, while sorting through salvaged planks in a lumberyard, she reached for a board at the same time he did. Their fingers touched, and neither of them pulled away. Tell me something you've never told anyone, she said suddenly. Wesley hesitated. When Grace was born, I didn't feel ready. I thought I'd ruin her life. But you didn't. No, he said. I just ruined mine so hers could be better. They stood in the quiet, surrounded by the scent of cedar and the hush of falling snow. Cassia spoke next. I lied to someone once. Told them I loved them when I didn't. Because it was easier than saying I didn't know what love was. You know now? I think I'm learning. Back at the lodge, she invited him into the small office she'd set up on the second floor. Blueprints hung on the walls, scribbled with notes in her handwriting. A space heater hummed in the corner, and a thermos of coffee sat untouched on the desk. I want you to help me run this place, she said. Wesley blinked. You what? Not just with supplies. With people. With guests. I need someone who sees what I don't. Someone who knows what it means to build something from nothing. Cassia, I've never managed anything more than my own hours. Exactly. You've made a life most people couldn't survive. That's the kind of strength I need here." He stared at her, caught between disbelief and something deeper. "You offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership, not just in the lodge." She stepped closer, voice low. "In everything." Wesley felt the ground shift beneath him, not in fear, but in something startlingly close to belonging. Before he could speak, a knock sounded at the door. One of the contractors poked his head in. "Sorry to interrupt. There's someone downstairs asking for Miss Lorne. Says he's her brother." Cassia's face went still. Wesley watched her hands curl at her sides. "Tell him I'll be down in a minute," she said tightly. The door shut. Wesley stepped forward. "You want me to stay?" "No," she said. "But don't go far." He didn't. And as she walked down the stairs to face a piece of the past she hadn't invited, Wesley knew the turning point had come. Not for the lodge. Not for the town. For her. And this time, she wouldn't face it alone. Cassia descended the stairs with her shoulders squared, each step slower than the last. Wesley remained upstairs, leaning against the wall just out of sight, listening to the low murmur of voices below. The moment he heard the unfamiliar timbre of a man's voice, smooth, clipped, and too polished for a mountain town, he knew exactly who had come knocking. "Cass." The man greeted, his tone more performative than warm. "I figured I'd find you buried under drywall and pipe dreams." Cassia didn't answer immediately. She stood at the bottom of the staircase, facing her brother, Julian Lorne. His coat was unwrinkled despite the snow, his shoes clean despite the gravel. He looked like the city itself had followed him into the mountains. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Julian stepped forward, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve. "I wouldn't be if you hadn't ignored every call for the last 3 months. You walked away from board seats, property holdings, and nearly $4 million in dividends last quarter. Our legal team is in knots. I signed everything over. Legally. You don't need me." "I don't," Julian admitted. "But the press does. The investors do. The family does." Cassia crossed her arms. "I'm not a placeholder for optics. I never was." Julian's eyes swept the stripped-down lobby with a mixture of confusion and disdain. "You're really doing this? Living in an inherited mountain house, renovating a building that's been condemned since we were in college. It's not condemned anymore. Cass, this makes no sense. You had everything. I had noise. I had people who smiled at me because they had to. I had my name plastered on things I didn't build, and my value measured in percentages." Julian's voice sharpened. "You had control. I had nothing that was mine." Wesley didn't mean to listen, but the words slipped through the rafters. He didn't move until he heard the door close. Then he stepped down, boots heavy on the stairs. Cassia stood in the center of the empty lobby, arms still folded. She didn't look at him right away. "You told him to leave?" Wesley asked. "I didn't have to. He came to confirm I was serious. And now he knows I am." He reached her, pausing a few feet away. "You okay?" Her laugh was dry, but not brittle. "I think I'm finally starting to be." They didn't speak again until they were outside, walking the snowy path behind the lodge where a small creek trickled beneath a crust of ice. Wesley kicked a stone into the water. "Grace's school is hosting a winter showcase next week," he said. "She's singing in it. Wants you to come." Cassia looked over. "She asked for me?" "She said she wants to show you her fancy voice. You've been promoted from cookie lady to audience of honor." Cassia smiled, and he noticed it reached her eyes in a way it hadn't before. "I'll be there." The day of the showcase arrived clear and cold, the kind of afternoon where the air smells like pine and wood smoke. The school's tiny auditorium was packed, parents crammed into folding chairs, scarves and coats piled along the back wall. Wesley sat beside Cassia in the second row, Grace's name circled on the program in red marker. When Grace stepped onto the stage in her red sweater dress and bright white tights, Cassia leaned forward instinctively. The music began, and Grace's voice, high and sweet, floated above the piano. Cassia didn't clap first when the song ended, but she was the first to stand. Grace beamed from the stage, and Cassia waved both hands with a joy that didn't care who was watching. Afterward, Grace raced down the aisle and threw her arms around her father's waist, then turned to Cassia. "You heard me." Cassia knelt down, her eyes bright. "You were perfect." Grace grinned, then looked up at Wesley. "Can we go get cocoa?" "There's a diner down the road," he said. "Best marshmallows in town." They walked together, the three of them, through the snowy streets, the day fading into dusk around them. At the diner, Grace pressed her face to the window, watching as staff arranged gingerbread houses on the counter. Cassia leaned toward Wesley. She's going to ask if she can have one. She's going to ask if she can build one. Then ask if she can take it home. Then ask if she can sleep with it. Cassia laughed softly. Let her. They sat on either side of Grace in a booth that smelled like syrup and cinnamon. Wesley watched as Cassia helped scoop whipped cream into Grace's cocoa, her hand steady, her voice gentle. Your daughter makes me feel like I've always belonged here, she said later, when Grace had fallen asleep in the booth with her head on Wesley's shoulder. You do, he replied. Cassia looked at him, the noise of the diner melting away. Wesley, I know where I come from. I know what people see when they look at me. But you never treated me like a prize or a problem. You saw me when I didn't know how to see myself. He hesitated, brushing a crumb from the table. I didn't fall for the lodge, or the house, or the name you stopped using. She reached across the table, her fingers curling around his. Then what did you fall for? You, Cassia. His voice was quiet, but sure. The woman who makes my daughter laugh. The one who works with her hands, not because she has to, but because she wants to. The one who didn't run when things got hard. Cassia's hand tightened around his. I love you. Wesley looked at her for a long moment. I love you too. The words weren't rushed. They didn't need to be. That spring, the lodge opened. Locals who had doubted the project now gathered under the new timber awning, marveling at the restoration. Rooms were booked months in advance. The restaurant served fresh, locally sourced meals beneath Edison lights and exposed beams, and the terrace hosted stargazing nights that drew couples from neighboring towns. Cassia didn't just manage the lodge, she lived in it, breathed it, made it pulse. Her office overlooked the valley, but she was rarely there. More often, she was out in the gardens with Grace, or helping guests find snowshoes, or sitting beside Wesley at the fire pit, her boots muddy and her smile easy. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and cast gold across the lake, Wesley led Cassia up to the rooftop. A table was set with wildflowers and candles, a blanket draped over the back of her chair. She stopped short. What's this? He pulled something from his pocket, a small velvet box, worn at the edges. I don't have a mansion, he said, or a yacht. What I have is a cabin with a roof that leaks once a season, a daughter who already calls you family, and a heart that's been yours since the first time you handed me a slice of pie. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, a single oval diamond set in a twisted band of rose gold. I want to build something with you. Not just a life. A home. One with uneven floors and laughter in the walls. Cassia didn't speak. Her eyes filled, and she nodded before she could find her voice. Yes, she whispered. He slid the ring onto her finger, and when she kissed him, the wind caught the hem of her dress and the candles flickered, but nothing could touch the moment. Later that summer, they were married beneath an arch of wildflowers on the lawn behind the lodge. Grace walked Cassia down the aisle, scattering petals and holding her hand the whole way. The guests were a blend of townspeople, lodge staff, and a few familiar faces who had once doubted Cassia's choices, now smiling as she made them. Wesley wore a charcoal suit that didn't quite fit his shoulders, and Cassia wore a dress she'd found in a second-hand boutique in Vermont, lace, long sleeves, and a sweep of silk that caught the sunlight. They said their vows beneath the open sky, promising nothing extravagant, only to keep choosing each other, every day. As they kissed, Grace clapped the loudest. That night, they danced on the terrace under strings of lights and a sky full of stars. And when the music faded, and the last guests left, Wesley carried Cassia across the threshold of the lodge, where the fire waited, and the life they'd built, imperfect, extraordinary, theirs had only just begun. The early days of their marriage unfolded like the soft bloom of spring after a long, hard frost, quiet, deliberate, and filled with small, breathtaking moments. Nothing extravagant. Just routines that slowly stitched their lives together, Wesley making coffee before sunrise while Cassia dragged on her thick socks, Grace running into their room with wild braids and louder questions. The sound of hammers and laughter echoing from the lodge as it thrived under the weight of their shared vision. But change, even when welcome, has sharp edges. It started with the letter. Cassia found it tucked beneath the stack of invoices on her desk in the lodge's office. The handwriting was unmistakably her mother's, controlled, slanted, never warm. The envelope was clean. No return address. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. The contents were precise and clinical. A charity gala in the city, hosted by Lorne Holdings, benefiting children's health initiatives. Her attendance was expected. Her name was still attached to the foundation, and Julian had apparently leveraged that to secure donors. There was no request, only presumption. She read it twice before folding it slowly and setting it aside. That night, she didn't mention it to Wesley. Not because she didn't trust him, but because she needed to sit with the storm first before she handed him the umbrella. But he noticed. "You've been quiet," he said, pulling off his boots by the cabin door as Grace played with her dolls on the rug. "I got a letter," she said, not looking up from her muck. "From them?" She nodded. Wesley took the chair across from her. "What do they want?" "There's a gala next weekend. My name's still tied to the Lorne Foundation. Julian used it to draw donors. They want me there. For photos. For headlines. You going?" She looked at him then, really looked at him. "Do you want me to?" "I want you to do what makes you feel like yourself," he said. "But if you're asking whether I want to see you photographed next to your brother while reporters ask about the lodge you built without them, no, I don't." She didn't respond right away. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Cassia, I don't need to protect you from your past. I just want to know you're not walking back into it without a reason." She reached across the table, fingers brushing his. "I'm not. I just need them to understand that I didn't disappear. I chose something else. And it's thriving. Then let them see it on your terms." She smiled, tired but grateful. "Come with me. I'll wear the itchy suit." The gala was held in a historic ballroom in Manhattan, all gold accents and chandeliers dripping with crystal. Cassia wore a navy gown with capped sleeves and a back that dipped low. Wesley watched her move through the crowd with poise, her hand never leaving his. The whispers started early. The murmurs of Cassia Lorne's return. Of the man beside her whose boots didn't match the marble floor. But Cassia didn't flinch. Not when the cameras flashed. Not when Julian appeared, champagne in hand and a politician's smile plastered across his face. "You look radiant," he said, kissing her cheek like nothing had ever cracked between them. "And you look like you've rehearsed that line," she replied. Wesley stiffened beside her, but she squeezed his hand once behind her back. Julian glanced at Wesley. "You must be the husband." Wesley nodded. "And you must be the reason she left." Cassia's lips twitched, but she said nothing. Julian turned to her. "We missed you in Monaco." "The board, I'm not returning," she said, loud enough that the woman beside them flinched. "I'm not stepping into conference rooms or photo ops. I'm here because I wanted to make that clear in person." Julian's smile faltered. "That's a shame. You were always the most marketable Lorne. I'm not for sale." She turned, taking Wesley's hand. They left before dessert. In the cab back to the hotel, Cassia rested her head on Wesley's shoulder. "I think I just closed the last door I'd left cracked open." "You didn't need it," he said. "No," she whispered. "I didn't." Back in the mountains, the snow began to melt. The lodge hosted its first spring retreat, a weekend of yoga, hiking, and locally catered meals. Cassia introduced a new line of handmade goods sourced from the town's artisans: pottery, candles, woven blankets. Each item tagged with a small paper card, built with love in the valley. Wesley took on more managerial work, handling logistics and guest services. Grace, now 6, had claimed the front desk as her personal kingdom, greeting visitors with stickers and hand-drawn maps of her favorite trees. One afternoon, while Wesley repaired a fence near the orchard and Cassia organized a supplier meeting in town, Grace stayed with a neighbor, an older woman they both trusted, who made the best blackberry muffins in 4 counties. When Wesley returned that evening, Cassia was already home, hair pulled into a braid, sleeves rolled up as she stirred a pot on the stove. He wrapped his arms around her from behind. "You smell like garlic and heaven." She leaned back into him. "We had 3 different vendors cancel today, and I tripped in the pantry and dropped an entire box of olive oil. You still smell good." She turned to face him. "You're biased." "Very." That night, after Grace was asleep, they sat on the porch wrapped in a shared blanket, watching the fireflies blink into life. Cassia stared up at the stars. "You ever think about expanding?" He looked over. "The lodge?" She nodded. "The one next county over. That old train station. It's got a wide platform, high ceilings. Could be something." "You thinking of starting all over?" "I'm thinking of doing it together. With more staff. More outreach. We could mentor young folks. Teach them how to build something the right way. Not just money. Meaning." Wesley considered it. "You sure this isn't the city in your blood talking?" "It's not about scale. It's about legacy." He kissed her shoulder. "Then let's do it." 6 months later, The train station was theirs. The renovation took longer than the lodge, but they hired apprentices from the local college, trained them on-site, and by the end of the year, the space had been transformed into a rustic event center and seasonal market. Cassia stood at the entrance on opening day, her hand in Wesley's, Grace bouncing beside them in a dress made from fabric Cassia had chosen the previous fall. "Ready?" Wesley asked. She nodded. "I've never been readier." They opened the doors, and the town poured in. Later that night, long after the last guest had gone, Wesley carried Grace fast asleep in his arms into the truck. Cassia followed, locking the front doors of the station behind her. As they drove home through the quiet hills, she looked over at him. "You know what I used to think love looked like?" she asked. He glanced at her. "Tell me." "Champagne and silk." Applause. "Appearances. But it looks like this, doesn't it? A truck that smells like pine, a daughter asleep in the back seat, and a man who never blinked when I unraveled." Wesley reached over and laced his fingers with hers. "Every version of you has been worth loving." A year passed. Then, too, the lodge became a destination for writers, artists, and couples who wanted something real. The station grew into a community hub, a place for weddings, harvest festivals, and quiet moments of connection. Cassia and Wesley celebrated their 3rd anniversary with a small vow renewal on the terrace of the lodge. Just them, Grace, and the mountains. Cassia wore a white cotton dress and bare feet. Wesley wore his best shirt and a tie Grace had picked out. They exchanged new vows, short, simple, and whispered. Afterward, they danced alone beneath the stars, the soft hum of crickets and wind their only music. Cassia leaned her head on Wesley's chest. "This is the life I didn't know I wanted." He kissed the top of her head. "It's the life you built." And in the quiet that followed, surrounded by everything they had created, love, laughter, legacy, Cassia knew, without a doubt, that she had never been more whole.